Okay, good morning, everyone. Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today's program is a part of the Presidential Primary Sources Project, and our program today is Camping and Tramping in New York, Maine, and North Dakota. Theodore Roosevelt's changing concept of wilderness camping. It's being presented to us today by Rachel Lane from the Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library and William Hansard from the Theodore Roosevelt Center. The Presidential Primary Sources Project is a collaboration between Internet2, the National Archives, and the National Park Service. It's a free series we put on every year from January through April. This is just a quick reminder that by participating today, you are agreeing to be recorded and archived as we keep recordings of all of our programs on our YouTube channel so that students and teachers can access them later. We absolutely want you to participate today. It's a lot more fun when you participate and ask questions. So if you haven't, go ahead and pull up your chat box right now. And that is the easiest way to put questions for our presenters. Just type them into the chat box. Go ahead and share where you're joining us from if you haven't already. And if you would like, you can also be on video like Edgewood Intermediate. If that is something you're interested in, go ahead and leave me a message in the chat box and I'll promote you and get you seen. Again, participate as much as possible because it is more fun and learning experience for all of us. Please be respectful of our interactive tools, though. We want to make sure any questions we're asking or any comments we're making are directly related to what our presenter is speaking about today. All right. Thank you one more time. We're so glad that you're with us. This is our website if you're interested in more information about our program or you're looking for links to our recording. So you can find all that information on our website or at that internet address. And now I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing so that our presenters can get started. Go ahead, Rachel.
All right, hello everyone. I am Rachel Lane of the Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library, and I am joined by my colleague, Dr. William Hansard of the Theodore Roosevelt Center at Dickinson State University. And we are delighted to have the opportunity to talk to you about Theodore Roosevelt and wilderness. So before we get started, we're going to talk about Theodore Roosevelt, our 26th president. He accomplished many things during his life and presidency. So I'd like to get your opinion of what do you know about him before we start delving into the presentation itself. Any thoughts?
I could answer this question, but I feel like I'd, have an unfair advantage. So
All right, well, I will go ahead and start talking. If anybody wants to type in some thoughts of what they know about Theodore Roosevelt and his life and presidency, that's great. Feel free to do that in the chat. Or if you happen to be on video, feel free to raise your hand. Yes, National Park System. That's a great example, and we will definitely discuss that briefly today. Anybody have anything else? Okay, so although Theodore Roosevelt was known for many things during his presidency, he is probably most well known for his conservation efforts or saving wild places. So national parks would be part of that. I also see that someone has said teddy bears. That is another connection point, which maybe we can talk about later during the Q&A if anybody is curious. We will not be discussing that in our presentation, but national parks will be part of the presentation. So one of the reasons why Theodore Roosevelt cared so much about conservation is because he spent so much time in the wilderness itself. Even during his presidency, he spent a number of nights a year outside camping. So what I'd like you to think about, and we'll ask at the end of the presentation, is what does wilderness mean to you? So as we're going through the presentation, just be thinking about that and we can discuss at the end. So as we think about Theodore Roosevelt, wilderness meant different things to him during his life. In his formative years as a child and as a young adult, he spent time in 3 places that were instrumental in developing his concept of wilderness. Those 3 places were New York, Maine, and North Dakota. Later, he would visit increasingly remote places like Africa and Brazil. So, before we start on the presentation, have any of you been to any of the wildernesses TR visited? So, have you been to New York, Maine, North Dakota, Africa, Brazil? If you want to type anything in the chat, feel free. All right, so I'm going to switch the slide. If anybody wants to pop in, I will try to keep my eye on the chat as I switch the slide. Oh, Southern Adirondacks in New York. That's awesome. So yes, that would definitely be one place we were just about to talk about. Anybody else? Maine. I have not yet personally been to Maine, but I hear that it's absolutely beautiful, especially at Acadia. So we'll also, of course, talk about Maine. Dr. Hansen will be talking about that. So let's begin and talk about the Adirondacks. So the Adirondack Mountains were the first wilderness that Theodore Roosevelt was exposed to. He grew up in New York City, but the Adirondacks were within reach of New York City elites like Theodore Roosevelt's family. So now you can probably get up from New York City to the Adirondacks in a few hours, but back then it was a lot more complicated to travel. We didn't have cars back then in Theodore Roosevelt's time, so it was more of a day of travel, but that still was pretty manageable. He visited the Adirondacks several times with his family when he was a child and a teenager, with visits in 1871, 1874, 1875, and 1877. One especially formative trip was when he went camping with Hilborn Roosevelt, his father, Theodore Roosevelt, his cousin, James West Roosevelt, known as West, and his brother, Elliott Roosevelt, in August 1871 when he was 12 years old. So you can see on the slide right now that this is a page from his diary that he had while he was in the Adirondacks and just keeping track of different things he had seen and experiences he had. So this comes from August 8th, 1871. And he noted in this diary that they were out in the bush and that after supper, his father read aloud from The Last of the Mohicans, which was a book about frontier expansion and conflicts between settlers and Native Americans set in New York. You'll also see that he liked to take detailed notes of the flora and fauna. So on the left side here on the slide is talking about different animals, including reptiles that he had seen. So the second example is Salamandra erythnata, which is the redback salamander. And he notes one of these salamanders was seen near Saranac Lake in the Adirondack Mountains. You'll note that he doesn't use the K at the end of Adirondack. And here's just a picture if you're curious what a redback salamander looks like. Here's a picture from a different book. This is not something TR drew, but it was contemporary to his time of what a redback salamander looked like. But TR did take notes as well as illustrations of things that he saw. So later in his notes from that trip, he, as you can see, drew a variety of different birds. I'm not completely sure what all of those are, but they're definitely larger birds. I know that for sure. So that's just an example of some of the birds that he himself drew. He returned to the Adirondacks during the early part of college. He visited in 1877 with his friend H.D. Minot. The two published a list of almost 100 summer birds in the Adirondacks, which was a well-regarded publication in the scientific community. So some of the birds TR saw in the Adirondacks, if you look at the list of about 100, include like a raven, an eagle, a heron, and a hawk. So we have some pictures from the digital collections at the Theodore Roosevelt Center of a raven on the left and a hawk on the right. So I'm curious, of those birds, raven, eagle, heron, hawk, have you seen any of those birds in your own areas? Hawk, yep. Do you know what type of hawk it was? This is a red-tailed hawk. Obviously, there are a lot of different hawks, like Cooper's hawk, hawks and crows. Yep. Theodore Roosevelt was a huge birder. He knew birds not only by sight, but also by sound. And it was something that he did his entire life. Even when he was president, he made a list of birds that he saw near the White House, or maybe it was at his White House retreat in Pine Knot, Virginia. All of them. Yep. Flying Hawk Elementary, also in the name. That's awesome. So Theodore Roosevelt loved the Adirondacks when he was a child, teenager, and when he was in college. And it was a place that was wild to him. But they gradually became too civilized for him. They were an accessible wilderness. It was too easy to get to them. And he wanted something more off the beaten path. So he began to be drawn more toward Maine, especially after the death of his father, Theodore Roosevelt Sr., when he was in college. So now I'm going to switch it to Dr. Hansard for him to talk about Maine.
Thank you, Rachel. Much appreciated. Thank you for taking us through the intro and through the time in New York there. I'm going to take us now to TR's time in Maine, which was quite formative to him. It's in 1878, at 20 years old, that TR will first visit Island Falls, Maine. This is in what's called the North Woods of Maine, the north part of the state. And he will visit with his cousin Emlyn Roosevelt and some other friends. His cousin Emlyn had actually been to Maine before, and he had gotten some help from a logger in Maine named William Sewell, Bill Sewell, he was known as. And so when cousin Emlyn and Theodore Roosevelt and these other people go, they will get Bill Sewell to guide them on their trip. And then Sewell will get some more help because it's such a big group, and he will enlist his nephew, Wilmot Dow. So we've got a kind of a big party here, and you can see on the slide, we've got a picture of Theodore Roosevelt and Bill Sewell and Wilmot Dow all together there in the North Woods of Maine. They're out hunting in the winter. You can also see we've got Theodore Roosevelt by himself, having hunted a rabbit there in his snowshoes. And so Sewell and Dow become very, very important people to TR. He will come to admire them a lot. He will describe them as mighty men with the axe. These are big, strong Maine woodsmen who are good at chopping trees and logging. And over the next several years, TR is going to make at least 4 trips to Maine, and he will be guided by Sewell and Dow each time that he visits. Now, this is a time in his life when he is working to make the strength of his body match the strength of his mind. He had been kind of weak and sickly as a child, and he needed to build the strength of his body. And he was inspired by the prowess of these hunting guides, Sewell and Dow. And he says, quote, "It was a matter of pride with me to keep up with my stalwart associates, and to shift for myself, and to treat with indifference whatever hardship or fatigue came our way. In their company, I would have been ashamed to complain." End quote. So see, he sees these men who are really rugged outdoorsmen, and he wants to be like them. It's not just physical exercise that he is getting in Maine, though. He is still working on his intellectual strength. He's doing his scientific observations, and he will fill his field book of zoology with really detailed notes. And he's going to list not only animals that he sees and animals that he hunts, but he'll even take down evidence of animals that he doesn't personally see, including mouse tracks in the snow. And he's got some notes on this page that you see here toward the bottom about talking about mouse tracks that he sees in the snow. To me, that's amazing. I know I couldn't see mouse tracks in the snow, even if I was looking for them. So the fact that he takes down that note is really interesting to me. And so in addition to the physical strength and the intellectual strength that he is building here, he's also going to have development of moral character at this time as well. TR is going to be really inspired by the beauty of the surroundings in Maine and by the religious devotion of Bill Sewell, his guide and his friend. And so TR is going to set aside time each day to read the Bible. He will go to a secluded spot in the woods off on his own to read, at the confluence, the joining of a river and a brook. And today that is actually a preserved piece of wilderness. That is Bible Point State Historic Site in Maine, where TR read the Bible each day. TR will develop a really strong friendship with these guys, with Bill Sewell and Will Dow. And he'll build this friendship so strong that when he establishes the Elkhorn Ranch in Dakota Territory, he will ask them to come build and manage it. Although the National Park Service says that Sewell and Dow were more comfortable riding logs than riding horses, they will gamely take on this challenge of becoming Dakota cattle ranchers with TR. So that will take us then to this next section about TR in North Dakota. Roosevelt will decide to head west in 1883 because he had done all he could with the wild, wild east. He decides he wants to go to the wild, wild west. And he wants to go to what's true wilderness. You heard Rachel talk earlier about some of the wilderness becoming too civilized, too easy. He wants a really rough challenge. And so he will go to the west to sort of survive and rough it out there. He's going to title an 1893 book that he writes, The Wilderness Hunter, and he will discuss his interest in coming to the frontier in that book. And he will say, for a number of years, much of my life was spent either in the wilderness or on the borders of settled country. So you can see that this is something that's really important to him, to have this wilderness in his life. He will come to Medora, Dakota Territory. We don't have North and South Dakota just yet at this time. And we believe he did this because it was the last stop on the railroad map before the white, empty, unknown space. The railroad and the towns sort of end at that point as he goes west. Another important reason he comes where he does to the west is to kill a buffalo. He wants to hunt a bison before they have all died out. They're becoming close to being extinct at this time. And he will successfully kill a bison after a 2-week adventure that had a lot of mishaps, a lot of problems, but he thinks it's the most fun he's ever had. But later in his life, he will realize, especially during his presidency, that it's important to conserve the bison, that they need to be around for everyone to enjoy. And so he will promote bison conservation once he realizes these animals of the far west really need to be protected. So thinking about this idea of how far west can you go? How far can you get? I want to ask you all, what's the furthest west you've ever been in the United States? Or if you happen to be in the west, the opposite direction. Maybe what's the farthest east? What's the farthest out in the frontier you guys have gone? You can put that in the chat, raise your hands if you're on video, whatever you would like to do. Plainview says Colorado. Yep, TR spends a lot of time in Colorado, hunts there several times. It's a beautiful country in Colorado. I've had the pleasure of going through a couple of times. Let's see if anyone else has any thoughts there. All right, well, feel free to put in the chat if you think of anything, and I will keep an eye on it. We live in Idaho. Great, yep, definitely. Hawaii, interesting answer. I wouldn't have thought about it that way, but in some ways, Hawaii is the West. That's interesting. California, Florida, talking about the other way, and Florida is in some ways the frontier too. A lot of cattle ranching tradition in Florida for sure. So there's some interesting parallels there. Thank you everyone for chiming in. East Virginia, okay. So let's keep moving on here. Hey, Texas. All right. So TR will bring his friends Bill Sewell and Wilmot Dow, who had guided him in Maine, to manage the Elkhorn Ranch in the Dakota Territory. And you can see, we saw them before with him in Maine, and now we can see in this picture they're here with him in North Dakota in their big buffalo coats and their leather chaps and everything. TR will spend some time on and off in North Dakota for 4 years, from 1883 to 1887. And he especially does this after his wife and his mother will both die on the same day in February 1884, Valentine's Day, 1884. His wife and his mother both die, and it's a terrible tragedy for him. And so he will delve deeply to cattle ranching life in Dakota Territory, cattle ranching, hunting, all kinds of outdoor activities. And some will say that he was playing at being a cowboy rather than really being one. Even he says this sometimes, but he does really do the work as well. Later in life, TR will worry that the West has become like New York and Maine. It becomes too civilized for him. And he worries about the closing of the West and his sons not getting to experience what he experiences. And so as president, he will help to establish 230 million acres of public lands, 230 million acres. And he will protect wild places so that everyone can enjoy them. This conservation does come at a cost, especially to indigenous communities who had lived in these wild places their whole lives, had been stewards of these wild places, and then they were removed from it for it to be conserved by the government. All this to be said, TR will remember his time in the Badlands of North Dakota fondly for the rest of his life. He said it was, quote, where the romance of my life began. And he said that he never would have been president if not for his time in North Dakota. After he died in 1919, different organizations will work to preserve the Badlands that he had known so well. In 1947, Theodore Roosevelt Memorial Park was established, and that designation was changed to Theodore Roosevelt National Park in 1978, and we still have that national park today in North Dakota. And it is the only national park that is named for a person. And so talking about the importance of this conservation of these national parks, I want to ask you all, how many, if any, national parks have you been to, and which was your favorite? So if we have anybody who's been to national parks, let us know how many you can think of you've been to and which ones you really liked. I know I really enjoy Theodore Roosevelt National Park quite a lot. It's a beautiful place. Yosemite, great answer. TR spent some time there when he did a Western tour. Gettysburg Battlefields, I believe that's a national park. Yes, 14 national parks at Flying Hawk. Wow. Edgewood and Plainview, both Yellowstone. Yes, Yellowstone's beautiful, beautiful, interesting place. Zion, all really big, important places that have been preserved through the national park system. Arches, Yellowstone. We got a lot of people visiting Yellowstone. It probably is the most visited. No, the most visited national park is Great Smoky Mountains, but that's in part because people use it as a thoroughfare as well. But Yellowstone's definitely up there. About 100, Creek House says. Wow. There's definitely a lot of park sites to visit, so it's good that you've been able to see so many. And with all of that, I'm going to pass it back off to Rachel as we begin our conclusion and talk about what all of this means.
Thank you, Dr. Hansard. So, as we conclude these thoughts of wilderness, I just want to have a few reflections. So, Theodore Roosevelt rose through the ranks like a rocket through the political ranks. He starts first serving locally in New York, and all of a sudden, of course, later on in his career, he becomes the president. So that's very far to achieve. And he embraced his public image as a rough riding cowboy, as you can see in this picture on the left in this slide. He saw himself as both a man of the East and the West, book learning and rugged strength. And he tried to craft himself into a political figure that could appeal to a broad swath of the American people. So he wasn't, as they say in Texas, as my colleague Dr. Hansard would know, all hat and no cattle. Thanks to his lifelong experiences in the great outdoors, TR developed a deep appreciation for and understanding of the natural world. And it was due in large part to the time he spent in wilderness. So as we've seen, he started first in the Adirondacks, and by the end of his life in 1914, just 5 years before he died, he would take a trip down a remote river in the Brazilian rainforest in 1914. So I do see that we have a question from Plainview. Ever injured being a cowboy? I'm going to put that on the docket for us to answer at the Q&A, and I'll definitely defer to Dr. Hansard on that. For Theodore Roosevelt, it was important that everyone in the United States had the chance to encounter nature in the way he had, not just those with wealth and power. And we can see just by all the national parks that you guys have been to that this is something for everyone in the American public. So if you look at the second picture on our slide here, that is President Roosevelt and John Muir at Yosemite, which I know some of you mentioned you have been to. So he did not establish Yosemite National Park, but he did help to expand the park a little bit. And one transformative part of his presidency was camping in 1903 with John Muir in Yosemite. And I think that just fueled his desire to conserve public lands so that everyone could enjoy them. As president, he put much of his political capital into protecting wild spaces from commercial exploitation and preserving those places for all Americans. So he created dozens of national forests, federal bird reservations, game preserves, national parks, and national monuments. He felt so strongly it was his duty to preserve the American wilderness that he created many federal lands through executive order. So that's the president deciding on something. And that was sometimes greatly critiqued by his opponents. So we now see Theodore Roosevelt speaking, feeling strongly about conservation in the outdoors. He balanced this love of the outdoors with an understanding that a growing nation required natural resources to fuel its prosperity. Rather than wishing to protect the lands and materials from use, Roosevelt wished to preserve them for use. Still, he encouraged the responsible use of resources and feared their depletion. He called upon Americans to, quote, exercise the same responsible foresight in dealing with our great natural resources that would be shown by any prudent man in conserving and widely using the property, which contains the assurance of well-being for himself and his children. While he encouraged American citizens to make use of nature's bounty, he encouraged them also not to overuse or to be wasteful. And I do see questions in the chat, which I will 100% get to, but I just have one more thing I want to say. So Theodore Roosevelt set the standard for conservation of public land that has continued to this day. And politicians on both sides of the aisle, from Barack Obama to Richard Nixon, have championed preservation of America's cultural and natural resources. As we mentioned before, in TR's time, protection of public lands was often done without consideration of the native peoples who had called that area home for hundreds, if not thousands of years. But today, political leaders have begun to involve indigenous tribes and leaders more as they consider what wilderness and preserving wild spaces means for the future. So, as I suggested at the beginning of this presentation, I wanted us to think about our big overarching question now that we've looked at what wilderness meant to Theodore Roosevelt. So, if anybody wants to type in the chat, what does wilderness mean to you and what will you do to protect it? We can close off our presentation that way, and then we'll be glad to answer any questions you have about Theodore Roosevelt, conservation, or anything else. Okay, so Plainview says it means relaxing and having fun. That's definitely a big part, I think, of the national parks, to get out in nature and do so, like, you know, away from the city, get out in the country. Any other thoughts? Animals, yes, I think definitely preservation of different animals. I know we mentioned briefly bison conservation, but there are also like other examples like wolves in Yellowstone that I'm aware of, and maybe other examples that Dr. Hansard can think of. Plants, yes. Camping, that's, if I'm not mistaken, I think most national parks have campsites, and there are also like national recreation areas that are part of the national park system. Fishing and hunting. I think we probably do know Theodore Roosevelt as a hunter, but you might not know that he was also a fisherman as well. Travel, yes, that's another big one. Lakes, boating. Those are all great answers. Experiences, yes. Beauty, I love that answer. So I think that that is something that Theodore Roosevelt has this great quote, and I can't recite it completely offhand about the Grand Canyon, but basically he says, leave it as it is. All you're going to do is mar it if you try to make any sort of developments or improvements to it. And that was from 1903. Spending time surrounded by nature. I agree with that. Any further thoughts before we go to Q&A? Also let Dr. Hansard jump in as well. Hikes, yes, I think Theodore Roosevelt likes the hikes for both the physical aspect, and also the, just being surrounded by beauty. Okay, I think we have a hand raise. Maybe somebody got that?
That was Creek House, and I think they put their comment in the chat, so hopefully.
Oh, gotcha. Do the Junior Ranger program? Yes. My nephew has done that. He did that at Arches and a couple parks in Utah. Had a wonderful time. Trees, peace, all really good answers. All right, so at this point in time, I will pass it along to Dr. Hansard for him to answer the question about Theodore Roosevelt being injured as a cowboy. And of course, oh wait, there's a lot of questions. Okay, so
We're gonna
feel
get
free
to them.
keep going.
We got time here. Let me go ahead and start with the injury question, because one good thing about TR, for those of us who study him, is he wrote down just about everything that ever happened to him and just about everything he ever thought. He wrote a lot. He was always writing. And so we know about some of the injuries he received when he was a cowboy. The answer is yes, because he wrote about them in his autobiography that he published in 1913. He gets two pretty, well, I don't know about serious, but pretty painful injuries while he's a cowboy. He cracks a rib at one point, and even worse, he breaks the point of his shoulder one time, and that is a really, really painful, difficult injury to work through. And the shoulder, what happens actually is he says, I was riding a big sulky horse named Ben Butler, which went over backwards with me. He's on the roundup, and he sort of falls off a horse that lands on him falling backwards, and it will break his shoulder. And the horse actually won't even get up off of him, and they have to tie ropes around its neck and pull it off of his body to get it off of him. But he will then go back into the roundup and keep working with this broken point of his shoulder, which is pretty impressive. And several times he will be thrown from horses, things like that, and he will receive some sprains, bruises, breaks, so on and so forth. Yeah, he gets injured several times. And so it was not, he wasn't just out there watching other cowboys do it. He was really getting himself into the work. I think that next question right after that was, how long did he live? 60 years. He was born in 1858 and he died in 1919 at 60 years old. He worked his body pretty hard, not just being a cowboy, but all these types of adventures that we talked about, especially that adventure he takes down the river in the Amazon in Brazil. That does a really serious toll on his body. So yes, he dies in his sleep of a pulmonary embolism, of a blood clot, when he is 60 years old. I think there's some more. Rachel, I will let you take these ones that are coming in here at the bottom of the chat if you'd like.
Sure, I'll take two, and then you can take any remainders that come, and we can kind of rotate. Okay, so yes, Theodore Roosevelt did have children. He had 6 children. As we mentioned in the presentation, his wife tragically passed away on Valentine's Day in 1884. She gave birth to a daughter 2 days before. Her name was Alice. TR's first wife's name was also Alice. So that was his first child. He did remarry to his childhood sweetheart, I guess, if you will, Edith. They had 5 children. Their children were Theodore Roosevelt Jr., Kermit, Ethel, Archibald, and Quentin were their 5 children. And if you have any more questions about children, I can try to answer those. Then the next question from Edgewood, 5th, said, how old was Roosevelt when he served as president? So I know he was in his 40s. I am almost positive he was 42 when he became president. Dr. Hansard can check my math for me.
Youngest person to ever assume the presidency. John F. Kennedy was the youngest ever elected.
Yes.
But Theodore Roosevelt becomes the president when he's the vice president and the president was assassinated. And yes, he will be 42 years old when he first takes office.
And he served for, I think, 7 years, if I'm not mistaken. So
7.5-ish, yeah, something like that.
So just before he turned 50, he left, or no, just after he turned 50, he left the presidency because he left the presidency in March 1909.
Yep.
All right, Dr. Hansard, you can take the question of was he sick when he was younger? And yes, to Robin's note, Quentin, his son Quentin, did tragically pass away in World War I. He was shot down on July 14th, 1918. And that had a huge impact on Theodore Roosevelt. And some people believe that it may have, not that he died of a broken heart per se, but he died a couple months later. And so like he clearly was very impacted by that tragedy. And then his son Ted also died in World War II, as well as his son Kermit. So he lost 3 of his sons in the World Wars.
Yes, and he had encouraged his sons to go to war. He thought it was something that was very important for men to do. And he will, of course, to some degree regret that when Quentin is killed in a dogfight over France. But he did think it was important to fight. It's part of the reason he goes to fight in Cuba in the Spanish-American War. So the question from Galileo STEM, was he sick when he was younger? When he was a little boy, he was very, very sick. He had a couple of problems. The biggest one was asthma. And asthma was much more difficult to treat when he was a child in the 1850s and 1860s. They didn't know as much about it or how to treat it. And his asthma was so bad, he had so much difficulty breathing that they thought it might kill him. It was fairly serious. And they had a few treatments for it. Sometimes it was just that his father would take him out on a carriage ride really fast in the middle of the night to try to get some fresh air into his lungs. They would also have him drink black coffee, just straight coffee. He will continue drinking black coffee in large amounts his whole life, and I think it's because he drank it so much as a kid. They will also have him smoke cigars until he vomits, which doesn't sound very pleasant, but apparently it sort of resets your diaphragm, your muscles, and so that helped with some of those attacks. He will get better with the asthma as he becomes a teenager and a young man, although he will continue to suffer some asthma attacks, bronchitis, other respiratory issues his whole life. When he was a little boy, he also had problems with his heart as well. And in fact, a doctor told him he shouldn't even run up a flight of stairs. It might kill him. His heart was so bad. But he says, that's no life to live. I'm going to do what I want. I see Edgewood has a hand up. I've got one more question I'm going to answer, and then Edgewood, I will get to you. Or Rachel. I will let Rachel take that if she would like, either one. But did his children have long lives or become conservationists? Obviously, we heard Quentin, unfortunately, did not have a long life. He is shot shot down from his plane, fighting in World War I, excuse me. I forget how old Ted is when he dies not long after the Battle of the Bulge in World War II. He's in his 50s, I think.
He was born in 1887, so I don't know what the math would work
What the
out.
math is on that. So his son Kermit, very unfortunately, will die of suicide. He had some problems with alcoholism and other issues, so he will die during World War II as well. Did Ethel live a long time? I don't know.
Yes, Archie, Ethel, and Alice.
Of course, Alice, yes.
Yeah, Archie and Ethel both lived into their 80s. I know that they passed away in the 1970s. And then Alice, who was the oldest, lived the longest of all of them.
Yes.
And she passed away when she was 96 years old.
Yes, Alice, I think, outlived basically everyone
Yes.
in the family, pretty much.
Yes.
And I don't know if anyone was really strongly into conservation. I do know that Ethel is the one who sort of created the legacy as we know it. Ethel was very strong in promoting TR's legacy and getting historic sites in his name, including the birthplace site in New York and places like that. So they certainly had, they recognized the importance of protecting important things.
I do know Ethel served on the board. She was one of the few women to serve on the board of the American Museum of Natural History in New York.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
she also loved to go exploring. Even when she was in her 70s, she was climbing sites like Machu Picchu in Peru.
Yes.
So I think she definitely got the adventure bug from TR.
Yes, and Edith, his wife Edith as well, she will live
Yes.
a pretty long life. She will die in 1948, and she will travel and see much of the world and find significance in those types of spaces as well. So, All right, I think Edgewood, did you have another question or did we answer it? We're getting thumbs up. Yeah. Okay. I think we're gonna.
Go ahead. What was the strategy to conserve animals?
That's an interesting question. Part of this depends on which animals we're talking about. I'm sorry, Rachel, if you had thoughts on this, I should.
No, you go, you go. I'll add if I have any.
Sure. So there's a couple of things here. Probably the most important animals to TR that he wanted to conserve were birds. It was extremely important to him that all kinds of wild birds were protected. And the problem was that wild birds were being hunted a lot for their feathers, and for other reasons as well. But the feathers of wild birds were being used in fashion, in women's hats and women's clothing, and other places as well. But what TR does to protect birds is to protect the land that those birds live on and to protect their nesting areas, the rookeries, and things like that. So actually, Theodore Roosevelt, he doesn't invent the national park system. That already exists and he uses it. But he does invent the National Wildlife Refuge System. At the time, they're federal bird reserves. They're specifically for birds, and then they become for all wild animals. But he will create the first wildlife refuge is Pelican Island off the coast of Florida. And it's land that the federal government already owns. And so he says to his advisors, is there any law that forbids me from just protecting this land and making it a bird reserve? And they will say, no, there's nothing that will stop you from doing that. And so he says, I so declare it. And with that, he creates national wildlife refuges for animals to be safe, where they can't be hunted by these plume hunters, these feather hunters, and other issues. And today, that's still part of what the wildlife refuge system does, right? Is make sure that there's wild spaces, safe spaces for our animals to live. The other animal that comes to mind when we talk about the strategy to conserve them is the bison. So the American bison, at its peak, there will be 30 to 50 million of them all over the North American plains. They are everywhere. But through hunting efforts by both private hunters and the United States government, the military, the bison will go down to literally a few hundred, from tens of millions to a few hundred. That is all that is left. And so what they will do is, and a lot of these bison are in private herds. So if you've heard of men like Buffalo Bill and Pawnee Bill, these guys who had shows and who had private ranches, they will use those bison to breed a greater population, and they will also crossbreed them with cattle. And that will help to bring the numbers back up. And today, obviously, bison are no longer endangered. You can eat bison again if you want to. You can buy bison hides. I occasionally have a buffalo burger here in North Dakota. So that was a successful effort. There are not tens of millions of them, but there are many, many more than a few hundred, like we got to at the turn of the 20th century. So yeah, there were multiple sort of ways you could work to save the wild animals of North America.
Okay, I'll jump in on the pets question and favorite horses. So yes, Theodore Roosevelt loved pets. When he was in the White House, there were so many different pets. There were at least 40. I've tried to do my own research and figure out how many. There were at least 40, probably over 50. So I'll give you some examples. So he had 12 horses. We can go through some of the names of the horses maybe after we get through some of the questions, but 12 horses. He had 10 dogs, 5 guinea pigs, 3 snakes, 2 Shetland ponies, 2 cats, 2 kangaroo rats, 2 white rabbits with pink eyes, 1 mouse who was a pet for 48 hours named Nibble, 1 hen that was, oh no, hold on, 1 hen, 1 pig, 1 bear, 1 lizard, 1 badger, 1 macaw, 1 rat, 1 garter snake, 1 rabbit, 1 one-legged rooster named Fierce, 1 flying squirrel, 1 barn owl, 1 hyena, and 1 goat. And I don't know if there's anything Dr. Hansard wants to add about TR's mini pets.
Yeah, as you were going through the list, did you say the guinea pig fighting Bob Evans? Did I miss that one, or was he in there?
5 guinea pigs. I did not mention the name though. Yes,
Fighting
Bob
Bob Evans is a great one.
Yes.
A lot of the animals they had fantastic names. The badger was Josiah. They called him Josh.
Yes.
The badger would get at people's pant legs. He would bite and pull at the end of their pant legs. They liked him, but they also thought he was annoying. That was interesting. The pets also, this is going to allow me to plug for our social media. If you guys are on Facebook, if you are on X, Instagram, LinkedIn, any of the big social medias, you can follow us. I think of this because we have a story that's actually about to go up very soon about one of his pets, a dog that they called $2. And that's just like one of our favorite animals right now. They called him $2 because they rescued him from the pound and it cost $2 to do it. So instead of giving him another name, they called him $2. But yes, I mean, you could talk all day about the pets and the horses. We got lots of great pictures in our digital library where you can see a lot of these animals. If you go to TheodoreRooseveltCenter.org, you can see pictures of the children holding their guinea pigs, pictures of TR playing with his dogs, video, even film of him playing with the dogs. So that would be fantastic. I'm going to jump ahead to the how many animals were killed every year, and then if we can go back to the grandchildren, just because I double checked it to be sure I was right. So both bison and birds for feathers, these are the two that I know the most about. They're literally killing several million of these every single year by about the 1900, by the turn of the 20th century. Several million bison, several million birds. The feathers, just to really drive this home, per ounce, the plumes of the snowy egret, the feathers of the snowy egret, were worth twice as much as gold per ounce. That's just how valuable these feathers were and just how important it was then to protect those birds from the hunters. I don't know the answer on how many grandchildren did he have. Rachel, I don't know if you know that one.
I
Are you
know,
doing the list? Are you writing them out?
yeah, I'm trying. So I know for sure that his daughter Alice had 1 daughter.
Paulina.
I know that Ted Roosevelt Jr. had 4 children. I know that Ethel had 4 children. I think both Kermit and Archie also had 4 children, but I'm not completely sure on that.
Yeah.
So I think it's somewhere around 15. TR did not meet all of those grandchildren. Some of them were born after his death. So I think the number is around 7 that he met. I know his
Yeah.
first grandchild was Grace, who was Theodore Roosevelt Jr.'s daughter, and his first grandson was Ethel's son, Richard Derby Jr.
Yes, and he absolutely adored grandchildren. We have lots of letters where he talks about how much fun he has playing with grandchildren. We have pictures of him holding the babies. That was a part of his life that he really loved, was family. So, what about the hyena? What do we know about the hyena? I knew it existed, but I don't really know anything about the story.
I think it was a gift from a foreign
Oh,
like dignitary,
from
but I
Ethiopia,
don't
maybe,
know.
I think that may be, or what would have then been Abyssinia, as it was called then. I think
I
that's
think
correct.
and I think it did not live very long at the White House. I think it was sent to a zoo somewhere,
Yep,
but
it
I
was
don't
sent,
know.
I think, to the National Zoo in Washington, I
That would
think.
make
It
sense.
may have been
Yeah.
sent to New York, but yeah, that was not the kind of pet you could keep at home very long.
Yeah. Well, we still have a bit more time. If anybody else has questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, or if there are follow-up things. Dr. Hansard has something.
Yes, I do. Let's talk about the teddy bear. We've got a few minutes, so let's tell the story of how the teddy bear comes to be, since we heard about that earlier. And some of you may know this story already, but in 1902, President Roosevelt is on a hunting trip in Mississippi. He's been invited by the governor of Mississippi to go hunting. So they've got kind of a big hunting party. They've got a lot of people and they've got guides with them to help, and they are hunting for black bears in the forests of Mississippi. And this hunt is going fairly poorly. They're not finding bears to shoot, and they're getting kind of frustrated. And so one day, President Roosevelt and several others will take a break for lunch. They will stop hunting for a little while in the day. And while they stop for their break, one of the hunting guides will find a black bear. And instead of shooting it, he knows the other people want to be the ones to shoot it. he will actually subdue this bear with the help of his hunting dogs. They will get control of it, and they will tie this black bear to a tree. And then President Roosevelt and his other men come back, and they see this black bear tied to a tree. And President Roosevelt refuses to shoot this bear. He says it's unsportsmanlike. It's not the right thing to do. I didn't get it myself. Now, he will ask someone else to shoot it to put it out of its misery, but he refuses to do it because it is unsportsmanlike. And then what happens is there is a cartoon that goes out in newspapers all around the country that depicts this event with Roosevelt standing there with his gun and the bear tied to a tree and him with his back to it. Yes, good. I'm glad you're on top of it, Rachel. I was hoping you would get there. So fantastic. So you can see this cartoon. He's got the hunting guide in the background holding the bear, and he's refusing to shoot it. And it's called Drawing the Line in Mississippi. Some scholars believe this has a double meaning because some people believe it's also about his stance against lynching in the South, and that there's sort of a double meaning there. But this little bear that you saw in that cartoon becomes a symbol that everyone loves. And that cartoonist, Clifford Berryman, will start putting it in every single cartoon that he draws of TR, even though none of the rest are about bears, but he's just always kind of there as a sidekick, as a side character. And what happens is this symbol becomes so popular that a couple of toy makers and candy makers in Brooklyn, New York, Morris and Rose Mictum, will, oh yeah, see, there's some more of the bears in another cartoon. Morris and Rose Mictum will make a little plush toy bear, and they will ask the president for his permission to put his name on it and call it the teddy bear. And so they do that. They put the little bear in the window called Teddy's Bear with apostrophe S originally. And that will sweep the nation. Everyone will start buying the bears by the thousands, by the millions. It just becomes this absolute symbol of who TR is. And at the same time, sort of independently, plush bears will become popular in Europe as well. So it becomes this sort of worldwide phenomenon. What's really funny then is in 1908, when Taft is running for president after TR, he will try to have a similar thing, and they will come up with Billy Possum and have this plush possum to show people. Billy Possum was not as popular as the teddy bear, let me tell you, but they certainly tried. But yeah, because of this famous event, we still call plush bears teddy bears even today. Interestingly enough, Roosevelt hated to be called Teddy. He did not like that name at all. He thought it was sort of a boy's name rather than a man's name. Also, it was a name that his first wife had called him. Oh, there's Billy Possum. Yeah, he's not quite as cute as the bear, is he? Doesn't quite work out. But you see, they're carrying the teddy bear away on a stretcher. That's one of the good cartoons. But yeah, since we had a few minutes, I thought it would be good to tell that story. So.
And see, we have a question about the bear pet, the topic of bears. The bear's name was Jonathan Edwards, which is the name of a big Christian leader, I think in the 1600s.
The Great Revival, or that's not what it's called, but something like that. Is he the one who wrote "Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God," or is that another?
Yeah, I think that yes.
Okay.
I don't know if I know more about the bear, though. Do you know more about the bear, Dr. Hansford?
No, but it's interesting that he was named after Jonathan Edwards, right? This like firebrand. There's something there about the personality of the bear, I think, right? Great Awakening. That's what I was looking for. Not
yes.
So there was this Christian revival in the 18th century, and Jonathan Edwards was a very famous Christian preacher at that time, and he delivers a very famous sermon called "Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God," where it's as if men are dangling by a web over a spider's web over the fires of hell. Basically, it's this very strong sermon. And TR was a very religious person, and he was very also sort of educated in history and things like that. So he often pulls names for animals from big figures in history and things like that. So that tracks, but I don't know any more about sort of my guess is that's another animal that probably ended up at the zoo, after not too terribly long, kind of thing you don't want to keep on the lawn of the White House, you know? And thank you, Robin. Yes, we enjoy telling these stories. I mean, TR just has so many crazy stories that you wouldn't believe. I mean, it's pretty astounding. It's a pretty astounding figure. But I do think we're approaching the end of our time, it looks like. We have a couple more minutes if there are any questions, but we may have reached the natural conclusion of things.
Well, if you guys have any more questions, now's the time.
And if you think of things later, reach out to us. We're always happy to help. That's what we're here for. You can reach out to the TR Center or the TR Presidential Library, and we'll help you. Thank you, Galileo. Always happy to see you. Bye-bye, Edgewood. Thank you for being here. Always happy to see you guys also.
All right, as we come to a close, thank you all for attending today's session. We really appreciate your participation and your very thoughtful questions. I did love the participation today, so thank you very much. Also, thank you to Rachel and William here for your time and your great presentation. We really appreciate it, and thank you for partnering with us. Okay,
Thank you.
you guys have a good day.
Bye-bye.